The hidden struggle. The clang of a skillet striking the tile floor cut through the dinner rush like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, the kitchen of Riverbend Grill froze. Pots hissed on the burners, servers hovered at the pass-through window, and steam curled up from the industrial sink. Then the manager's voice tore through the noise. "Emma, what is this?" Dennis barked, waving a slip of paper in the air. "This is table 12. They ordered chicken marsala. You sent out grilled salmon. You trying to ruin my night?" Emma Lopez, standing at the dish station, looked up from the stack of greasy pans. Her hands were soaked, her faded apron clung to her shirt, and strands of dark hair slipped from the messy bun under her cap. She hadn't written the ticket. She hadn't cooked the salmon, but she didn't argue. She bent down, picked up the fallen skillet with a towel, and returned it to the sink. Someone muttered near the line, "Wasn't even her ticket." Another snorted, "She works like a slave and still smiles." What's wrong with her? Emma heard it, but she kept scrubbing. Her face turned slightly away, just enough to hide the flush creeping up her neck. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than speaking up. At the dish station beside her, Ryan Carter stood still. To everyone here, he was Kyle, the new guy. Awkward in cheap black shoes, a borrowed uniform, and a crooked name tag. No one knew his real identity. No one knew why he was really here. Because Ryan wasn't a dishwasher, he was the CEO of Carter Hospitality Group, the parent company that owned Riverbend Grill and dozens of other restaurants across the state. And tonight, he wasn't watching the food. He was watching Emma. The pressure cooker. The Friday night rush roared back to life. Orders barked across the line. Servers sprinted in and out with trays balanced high. The kitchen smelled of garlic, onions, and burnt oil. Emma kept moving. Plates clattered, pans piled, her arms ached from lifting, her back burned from bending, and her feet felt like stone inside worn-out sneakers. She had started at 10 in the morning, and now, 10 hours later, she was still going. And she wasn't even being paid for all of it. Ryan had noticed. He had been undercover for a week, working beside Emma in the dish pit. He had watched her arrive early, stay late, and never complain. He had seen Dennis, the manager, mark her hours short on the punch card, cutting away half an hour here, an hour there. When Ryan asked one of the other cooks about it, the man shrugged. "That's just Dennis," the cook muttered. "He keeps payroll clean. If you don't like it, find another job." Ryan said nothing. He just watched. Every clang of a plate, every insult tossed Emma's way, every stolen hour of her life scraped against the memory of his mother. She had once worked in kitchens like this, late nights, little pay, always tired. She had complained once about unsafe equipment. 2 weeks later, she was let go for performance issues. She never recovered. Ryan had been 22, powerless. He had sworn that one day when he had the power, he would change the system. Now, standing in the hot steam of the dish pit, he wondered if he had already failed. "Lopez," Dennis barked again. "Pick up the pace. Those pans aren't washing themselves." "Yes, sir," Emma murmured. Ryan glanced at her. Her hands moved fast, scrubbing with practiced rhythm. She was young, maybe 25, but she looked older tonight, her face pale with fatigue. A thin scar cut across her forearm, faded but visible when the steam wet her sleeve. He had learned bits about her from the others. She had a little boy, 5 years old. She lived with her sister to save rent. Her husband had died in a construction accident 3 years ago. She had taken this job 6 months back, and since then she had been working doubles almost every week. When the others went home, she often stayed. Not because she wanted to, because Dennis told her she had to. Ryan had asked her once in a quiet moment why she didn't say anything. Emma just smiled faintly. "Some people don't get to complain," she had said. A test of endurance. The clock above the prep table ticked past 11 p.m. The last tables were finishing. The line cooks began breaking down their stations. The servers rolled silverware in the corner. The smell of bleach replaced the smell of onions. Emma was still at the sink, arms red from hot water. Ryan worked beside her, stacking trays, rinsing glasses. "Hey, Lopez," Dennis called, pulling on his jacket. "I need you to stay and clean the grease trap tonight. Don't leave until it's done." Emma nodded automatically. Ryan's chest tightened. He knew the grease trap was a filthy, dangerous task, one that required proper equipment and hazard pay. He also knew Dennis would never log her extra hours. When Dennis left, Ryan leaned toward her. "Emma, you okay?" She wiped her forehead with her sleeve. "I'm fine, just tired." "You shouldn't have to do this alone," he said. Her eyes flicked to him. "You're new. Be careful. If Dennis thinks you're lazy, you won't last a week." Ryan wanted to tell her who he really was, that he wasn't just another dishwasher, that he had the power to fire Dennis with a single phone call. But he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he picked up a wrench. "Then I guess we're both staying." A glimpse behind the mask, they worked in silence for nearly an hour. The kitchen grew quiet, the lights dimmed. Outside, the parking lot emptied until only 2 cars remained, Dennis's black SUV and Emma's old sedan. Emma scrubbed, gagging at the rancid smell from the trap. Ryan held the bucket, trying not to let anger choke him. At last, Emma slumped against the wall, her face streaked with sweat. "Then, fuck you," she whispered. Ryan shook his head. "No one should have to do this." She gave a faint smile. "It's just work. I need it. My son starts school next year. I can't afford to lose this job." That sentence hit Ryan like a hammer. It was the same thing his mother used to say. He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to break his cover right there. But he stayed silent, because tomorrow he needed to see just how deep this rot went. The suspense builds. When Emma finally left, it was nearly 2 a.m. She dragged herself toward her car, shoulders slumped, hair damp with sweat. Ryan followed at a distance, pretending to fumble with his phone. She sat in her car for a long moment before starting it. Through the windshield, Ryan saw her pull out a photo of a little boy taped to the dash. She touched it lightly, then drove off into the night. Ryan stood alone in the empty parking lot, the weight of her silence pressing on his chest. This wasn't just about one dishwasher. This was about a system that fed on people like Emma. Hardworking, quiet, desperate enough to accept abuse because they had no choice. He had come undercover to observe, but now he felt something shift inside him. Observation was no longer enough. Tomorrow, he would dig deeper. Tomorrow, he would find the truth. And when he did, no one in this kitchen, not Dennis, not anyone in the chain of silence, would see it coming. The mask of the manager. The next evening, the Riverbend Grill buzzed again with its usual storm of orders, clattering pans and impatient servers weaving through the narrow aisles. Ryan Carter stood at the dish pit, shoulders hunched like the other workers, wearing the same borrowed uniform. He carried the mask of Kyle, the new dishwasher, but behind his quiet movements, his mind turned like a storm. He hadn't slept much after the long night. Emma's words about her son had kept replaying in his head. She carried the weight of her entire world while men like Dennis piled on more, confident she would never push back. It was the same pattern Ryan had seen in dozens of kitchens over his career, the same cycle that had swallowed his mother. But now it had a face, a story, a pair of tired hands scrubbing pans until they bled. Dennis entered the kitchen late, a cigarette still clinging to the corner of his mouth as he barked greetings to the cooks. He was a heavy-set man in his 40s, with slicked back hair, a gold chain dangling across his chest, and a permanent scowl etched into his face. He thrived in chaos, not because he controlled it, but because he manipulated it. Ryan had watched him closely over the past week. Dennis never truly worked. He delegated, criticized, and preyed on the fear of his staff. He treated the restaurant like his personal kingdom and the workers like disposable pawns. Ryan noticed the way Dennis leaned close to one of the young servers, whispering in her ear with a smirk that made her face stiffen. He noticed how Dennis checked the clock-in sheets at the end of each shift, erasing minutes here, slashing hours there, with the casual cruelty of someone who had done it for years without consequence. He noticed how every complaint dissolved into silence once Dennis raised his voice. No one wanted to lose their job. No one wanted to be blacklisted. Tonight, Emma moved slower than usual. Her shoulders sagged, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. Ryan could tell she was at her breaking point, but she carried herself with the same quiet grace. She didn't argue. She didn't protest when Dennis tossed another stack of trays in her direction. She just worked, her silence saying more than words ever could. Ryan had grown up seeing men like Dennis in positions of power, men who discovered loopholes in the system and built empires on the backs of the voiceless. The difference now was that Ryan no longer stood powerless. He had built an empire of his own, but from boardrooms and spreadsheets, it had been easy to forget the smell of bleach, the sting of steam, the weight of dishes that never seemed to end. Being back in this kitchen reminded him of everything that had driven him here in the first place. Dennis strutted through the line, clapping one cook on the shoulder, scolding another for seasoning too lightly. He stopped when he saw Ryan loading dishes into the machine. "Kyle," he drawled, drawing out the fake name like it was a joke. "Don't stack the glasses that high. You break 'em, it comes out of your paycheck." Ryan nodded silently, though he knew legally Dennis had no right to dock pay for accidents. He kept his head down, letting Dennis believe he had authority. The truth would come later when masks came off. For now, Ryan needed evidence. He needed to see how far Dennis's abuses reached. Emma glanced at him briefly, her eyes a warning. "Don't talk back. Don't fight him. It isn't worth it." That was the rule of survival in this kitchen, and Ryan obeyed it, for now. As the night wore on, Ryan overheard conversations near the prep table. Two cooks whispered about missing overtime pay. One server quietly complained that Dennis demanded she cover 3 extra shifts last week without logging them. Another dishwasher, and Tio, older man with aching knees, muttered that he was done fighting because he had a family to feed. Ryan listened carefully, piecing together a pattern. Dennis wasn't just manipulating Emma. He was running the entire store like a private scam, shaving money off the backs of everyone who worked too hard to notice. At midnight, after the last table left and the dining room grew quiet, Dennis gathered the staff. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "All right, good job tonight. Sales were up. But remember, payroll's tight. No overtime. If I see anyone clocking out late, you'll answer to me." The staff nodded without meeting his eyes. Emma's face stayed blank. Ryan clenched his fists under the sink. Dennis smiled faintly, satisfied with his performance of power, then tossed his keys in the air before heading toward his office. When the group scattered, Emma stayed behind again. Dennis poked his head out of the office door. "Lopez, grease trap again. Don't leave until it's done." Emma nodded quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sir." Ryan's blood boiled. He waited until Dennis disappeared before he turned to her. "Emma, this isn't right. You shouldn't have to keep doing this." Her eyes met his, tired but resolute. "If I don't, he'll fire me. And if I lose this job, I lose everything. My son, my home. I can't take that risk." Ryan swallowed hard. He wanted to scream that she wasn't alone. He wanted to tell her who he was, that she didn't have to fear Dennis anymore. But he knew that revealing himself too soon would ruin everything. If he wanted lasting change, he had to see the full scope of Dennis's corruption. He had to catch him in the act. So instead of revealing the truth, he picked up the wrench again. "Then I'll help you." Emma gave him a faint, weary smile. "You don't have to." "I know," Ryan said softly. "But I want to." They worked in silence, side by side, the stench of old grease filling the air. Emma's hands trembled as she scrubbed, her body clearly close to collapse. Ryan felt guilt gnawing at him with every passing sea. Conned. He could stop this tonight. He could end Dennis's reign with a phone call. But would that solve the deeper problem? Or would it simply replace one corrupt manager with another, leaving the cycle to continue? Ryan knew the answer. He needed proof. He needed to gather every story, every stolen hour, every voice silenced by fear. Only then could he walk into the boardroom and burn this rotten system down from the inside. As the night stretched into morning, Ryan made a silent vow. Emma would not collapse again under the weight of Dennis's cruelty, not if he had anything to say about it. And soon, Dennis would discover that the dishwasher he mocked wasn't just another faceless worker. He was the man who could destroy everything Dennis thought untouchable. Whispers in the kitchen. The following night, the air inside Riverbend Grill was heavy with the scent of garlic and butter, the sharp tang of onions sizzling on hot pans, and the restless hum of another dinner rush. Customers filled the dining room, laughter and chatter spilling into the kitchen every time the swinging doors opened. Ryan Carter, still wearing the mask of Kyle, the quiet new dishwasher, had begun to blend into the background. The staff barely glanced at him anymore. To them, he was invisible, just another body at the sink, scrubbing away in the corner. But invisibility was his greatest weapon. It gave him a chance to see everything, hear everything, and collect every whispered truth that people only dared to say when they thought no one important was listening. Emma was already at her post when Ryan arrived. She had clocked in early again, her apron already damp, her hair tucked hastily under a cap. The shadows under her eyes had grown darker, the lines of exhaustion etched deeper into her face, but she moved with the same quiet determination. Ryan admired her strength even as it broke his heart to see her pour out every ounce of herself for a system designed to take and never give back. Tonight he promised himself he would learn more, not just about Dennis, but about the invisible chains that kept workers like Emma silent. He didn't have to wait long. The rush brought tension, and tension always loosened tongues. At the prep table, two line cooks argued in low voices about their hours. Ryan pretended to focus on rinsing pans, but his ears were sharp. "Dennis cut me again," one muttered, his voice thick with anger. "I worked a 12-hour shift, but the sheet only shows 10. That's 2 hours gone, just like that." The other cook gave a bitter laugh. "You're lucky. He erased 5 hours from me last week. Said payroll's tight, but then I saw him drive up in that new SUV. You think corporate cares?" Ryan's jaw tightened. He wanted to shout that he was corporate, that he cared more than they realized. But he held back, forcing himself to remain silent, invisible, patient. If he spoke too soon, he would ruin everything. Instead, he scrubbed harder, letting the steam sting his eyes, hiding the fire that burned inside him. Later, when the line quieted for a moment, Ryan noticed Emma pausing at the sink, her hands trembling slightly. He leaned closer, his voice low so only she could hear. "You've been working since morning again, haven't you?" She gave a small nod, her eyes fixed on the water. "Double shift. They said they needed me." Ryan's chest ached. "Did you get paid for the morning hours?" Emma hesitated, then shook her head almost imperceptibly. "Dennis said he'd add it next week, but he won't." She glanced up, her face pale. "Don't tell anyone I said that, please. If he finds out I complained." "I won't," Ryan assured quickly. He wanted to tell her that she had nothing to fear, that soon Dennis's power would crumble. But he could see the desperation in her eyes, the kind of fear that comes from years of being cornered. She couldn't afford promises. She needed proof. The evening dragged on. Orders piled up, mistakes were punished with sharp words, and Dennis stalked the floor like a predator, barking at anyone who slowed down. At one point, Ryan caught him leaning close to Emma, his voice a hiss. "Stay after again tonight, floors and grease traps. And if you don't like it, don't bother coming back tomorrow." Emma only nodded, her lips pressed tight. Ryan's fists clenched so hard the knuckles went white. Every part of him wanted to rip off the disguise, to tell Dennis that his reign of fear was ending right now. But not yet. He needed Dennis to bury himself deeper. He needed the staff to trust him, to speak, to share their stories. Only then would the truth explode wide open. When the shift finally ended and the last server clocked out, Ryan lingered near the back hallway. He overheard two of the younger dishwashers whispering together, their voices low with bitterness. "He docked me again, said I took too long on my break. He said the same to me yesterday. I didn't even take a break." Ryan stepped closer, pretending to stack trays. One of them glanced at him nervously. "You're new, right? Be careful. Don't say anything bad about Dennis. He'll make your life hell." Ryan gave a small nod, as though agreeing to stay silent. But inside, he stored away every word. This was bigger than Emma now. It was a pattern, a system of theft running through the entire store, one that depended on fear and silence to survive. Later that night, after Dennis had gone and Emma once again stayed behind, Ryan helped her scrub the kitchen floors. The harsh smell of bleach filled the air, the tiles slick beneath their knees. Emma worked slowly, her hands red and raw. After a long silence, she spoke in a voice so quiet he almost missed it. My husband used to tell me hard work always pays off, that if you keep your head down and push through, life rewards you. Ryan's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her that she deserved so much more, that the world had failed her. Instead, he said gently, "You're stronger than you think. I can see it." Emma gave a faint smile, weary but real. Strength doesn't pay rent. Those words echoed in Ryan's mind long after the floors were clean, and Emma drove off into the night. He stood in the empty kitchen, the hum of the refrigerators filling the silence, and made another silent vow. He would not let her strength go unseen. He would not let Dennis or anyone else steal another hour, another drop of dignity from people like Emma. The whispers in the kitchen had given Ryan what he needed, the proof that Emma wasn't alone, that Dennis had built his kingdom on the suffering of many. Tomorrow Ryan would begin pulling the threads together. And when the time came to reveal who he truly was, Dennis wouldn't just lose his job. He would lose the power he thought was unshakable. Breaking point. By the fourth night of Ryan's undercover work, the weight of silence in the Riverbend Grill kitchen had become suffocating. The air itself seemed heavy, thick with steam and grease, thick with words that everyone wanted to say but dared not speak. Every clang of metal, every hiss of boiling oil, every bark of Dennis's voice carried an invisible thread of fear that wound tighter around the staff with each passing hour. To Ryan, it felt like standing inside a pressure cooker, one that was seconds away from exploding. Emma Lopez arrived before everyone else again. Ryan noticed her walking across the lot as he leaned against the dumpster pretending to check his phone. She carried herself the way a soldier marches to a battlefield, not with eagerness, but with resignation. Her apron already hung around her neck like armor she could never remove. Her hair, hastily pulled back, revealed dark circles beneath her eyes, evidence of sleep stolen by exhaustion and worry. When she entered the kitchen, she did not smile or greet anyone. She simply went straight to the sink and began her shift as though it was the only rhythm she had ever known. The dinner rush exploded as usual. Orders slammed down from the servers like bullets fired from a gun. Tickets pinned to the rail in rapid succession. The line cooks moved like dancers locked in a frantic routine, oil splashing, flames leaping, knives clattering on cutting boards. Ryan worked beside Emma, his hands moving automatically, scrubbing, rinsing, stacking, his ears tuned to every raised voice, every muttered complaint. He could see the cracks forming more clearly each day. The cooks were tired, the servers were stretched thin, and Emma was on the edge of collapse. Halfway through the shift, Ryan noticed her swaying slightly at the sink. Her hands moved slower, her breathing heavier, as though each motion cost her more strength than she could afford. He leaned toward her, keeping his voice low. "Emma, are you all right?" She forced a faint smile, but her lips trembled. "I'm fine, just tired." But she wasn't fine. Ryan could see it in the way her knees buckled for a moment, in the way she gripped the edge of the sink as though it were the only thing holding her upright. He moved closer, ready to catch her if she fell. He didn't have to wait long. It happened quickly. The crash of a dropped tray startled the room, and Emma flinched. Her hands slipped, her eyes rolled back for a second, and then her body sagged forward. Ryan caught her just before she hit the wet floor. For one terrifying moment, everything in the kitchen froze. Even Dennis, who had been yelling at a server a second earlier, stopped mid-word. "Lopez!" he barked, storming across the room. "What the hell is this? Can't handle a little work?" Ryan felt his blood boil. Emma was limp in his arms, her skin clammy, her breathing shallow. She had not fainted from weakness. She had fainted from sheer exhaustion. Yet Dennis's voice carried no concern, no empathy, only anger that one of his machines had broken down in the middle of a rush. "She needs a break," Ryan snapped before he could stop himself. The words slipped out sharper than intended, and for the first time since he had entered this kitchen, Dennis's eyes locked on him. There was a flicker of suspicion, a narrowing of the gaze. "What did you say, Kyle?" Ryan forced his jaw to unclench. He lowered Emma gently into a chair near the prep table. then turned back to the sink, keeping his head down. "I said she needs water," he muttered, softening his tone. "She'll be fine." Dennis glared at him for a long moment before scoffing. "Fine. 5 minutes. Then she gets back to work. We don't get paid to sit around." Ryan bit down on the inside of his cheek so hard it almost drew blood. 5 minutes. That was all Emma was worth to him. 5 minutes before she was expected to stand again, scrub again, work again. He wanted to tear off the disguise, to shout the truth of who he was and end Dennis's cruelty right there in front of everyone. But he forced himself to stay silent. Not yet. Not tonight. Emma stirred after a few minutes, blinking groggily. She looked around, confused, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, trying to stand. Ryan held her arm gently. "Don't apologize. You need rest." But Dennis's shadow loomed over them. "Back to the sink, Lopez. Now." Emma obeyed without argument. She pushed herself up, shoulders slumped, and returned to the endless pile of dishes. Ryan followed, his heart pounding with fury. The whispers he had heard in the past days echoed in his head. Stolen hours, erased paychecks, blackmail threats. But seeing Emma collapse under the weight of it all made those whispers unbearable. Later that night, when the last table was served and the dining room emptied, Dennis called Emma into his office. Ryan lingered near the doorway, pretending to sweep the floor, his ears straining. "You embarrassed me out there," Dennis said coldly. "If you can't handle the work, maybe this job isn't for you." Emma's voice was soft, trembling. "Please, sir, I can handle it. You'll do better," Dennis cut her off, "and you'll stay late tonight to prove it. Grease trap and floors, like always. And if you even think about complaining to anyone outside this kitchen, I'll make sure no restaurant in this city hires you again. You understand me?" Silence. Then Emma's whisper. "Yes, sir." Ryan's hand tightened on the broom until it cracked under the pressure. He had heard enough. This wasn't just cruelty anymore. It was blackmail, coercion, theft of a life, 1 hour at a time. He had come undercover to observe, to gather information, to decide how best to change the system. But tonight, watching Emma bow her head to threats she did not deserve, Ryan realized something. Observation was over. Action was coming. The reveal. The following evening arrived with the same familiar chaos. The clatter of pots, the thunder of orders, the shouting of cooks trying to stay ahead of the crush. Yet beneath the routine, something in the air felt different. It was thicker, charged, as if the very walls of Riverbend Grill knew that something was about to break. Ryan Carter, still wearing the mask of Kyle the dishwasher, felt it too. He had endured nights of silence, nights of watching Emma suffer under Dennis's heavy hand, nights of hearing whispers from cooks and servers about stolen wages and hours erased from time cards. He had collected enough evidence in his mind to know this wasn't simply one manager cutting corners, it was exploitation, deliberate and systemic. Tonight, he decided, he would no longer remain just an observer. Emma was quieter than usual as she worked beside him at the sink. She moved mechanically, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. Ryan could see her strength thinning, stretched past the point of endurance. The night before had nearly broken her. Tonight, he feared, might finish what little she had left. Still, she did not complain. She never did. She scrubbed plates as though silence itself was her only shield, as though speaking would bring down punishment she could not bear. Dennis was in rare form that evening, strutting through the kitchen like a king surveying his kingdom. He barked at the servers for moving too slowly, berated the cooks for minor mistakes, and made Emma his favorite target, throwing stacks of trays her way with a sneer. "Pick it up, Lopez. You think customers care if you're tired? They want clean plates, not excuses." Ryan kept his head down, but inside his anger boiled. He had spent years in boardrooms listening to managers defend profit margins, cutbacks, necessary efficiency. But standing here, seeing Emma's hands raw from endless scrubbing, hearing the cooks whisper about pay they never received, watching Dennis steal dignity with every word, it became impossible to reconcile numbers on a spreadsheet with the human cost that created them. As the rush began to thin and the kitchen grew quieter, Ryan noticed Dennis heading toward his office with a clipboard in hand. A familiar unease settled in Ryan's chest. He knew what came next. Dennis would pull Emma aside again, threaten her with termination, demand more unpaid labor, and erase more hours from her paycheck. This was the pattern. Tonight, Ryan told himself, that pattern would finally shatter. He followed Emma discreetly as Dennis summoned her to the office. Ryan pretended to gather trash bags, hovering just close enough to hear. "You left streaks on the glasses last night," Dennis said coldly, not looking up from his clipboard. "Unacceptable. Customers notice those things. You'll be staying again tonight. Grease trap and kitchen floors. Don't argue." Emma's voice cracked slightly. "Sir, I worked a double shift again today. Please, Dennis slammed the clipboard onto the desk. "You think I care how many hours you worked? You're replaceable. Do you understand that? There are a dozen people who would take your job tomorrow. If you want to keep feeding that kid of yours, you'll keep your mouth shut and do as I say. And if you breathe a word of this to anyone outside this building, I'll make one call and every restaurant in this city will know not to hire you." Ryan stepped forward before Emma could reply. The broom he had been holding clattered against the wall as he entered the office doorway. His voice, when it came, was steady but sharp. "That's enough." Dennis spun around, eyes narrowing. "What did you just say, Kyle?" Ryan stepped fully into the office, his posture straight, his expression no longer that of a timid dishwasher. For the first time in days, he dropped the mask. His words came crisp, deliberate, each one cutting through the silence. "I said that's enough. You've stolen from these people long enough. You've bullied them, threatened them, treated them like they're disposable. But tonight, Dennis, it ends." The room seemed to freeze. Emma's eyes widened, confusion and fear crossing her face. Dennis's jaw tightened, then he barked a laugh. "Who do you think you are talking to me like that? You're a dishwasher, you're nothing." Ryan's eyes burned with intensity as he finally spoke the truth. "My name isn't Kyle, it's Ryan Carter. I'm the CEO of Carter Hospitality Group, and this restaurant, this kitchen, this staff, they all fall under my company. Which means tonight, Dennis, I'm not your dishwasher, I'm your boss." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma stared at him in shock, her mouth slightly open as though she couldn't quite believe what she had just heard. Dennis blinked, the color draining from his face before fury returned in waves. "You expect me to believe that? Some kid in borrowed shoes? This is a joke." Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he produced a sleek black card embossed with the company's crest. He placed it calmly on the desk in front of Dennis. "Check the name, then tell me if you still think this is a joke." Dennis's hands trembled as he picked it up, his eyes scanning the lettering. When he looked back up, his bravado had cracked. You set me up." Ryan's voice hardened. "No, you set yourself up. I didn't make you erase payroll records. I didn't make you threaten employees. I didn't make you work Emma to the point of collapse. You did all that on your own. All I did was watch, and now I have enough to end this." Emma sat frozen, tears welling in her eyes. Ryan turned to her, his voice softening. "You don't have to be silent anymore. None of you do. This ends tonight." Dennis tried to regain his swagger, puffing out his chest. "You think you can fire me without cause? I've been running this place for years. Corporate doesn't care about a few missing hours." Ryan stepped closer, his eyes locked on Dennis with unshakable resolve. "Corporate cares now, because I am corporate, and the days of managers like you building your comfort on the suffering of your staff are over." The office door had drawn attention. Several staff members stood nearby, peering in with wide eyes. They had heard enough to piece together the truth. Ryan turned deliberately toward them. "You've all been living in fear. You've all had hours stolen, breaks denied, dignity stripped away, but no more. I'm here to make sure every one of you is paid fairly, treated fairly, and respected as you deserve, and it starts tonight." The whispers that had once filled the kitchen now erupted into murmurs of shock, disbelief, and cautious hope. For the first time in years, the silence that Dennis had enforced through fear cracked wide open. Dennis looked around, realizing the tide had turned. His voice shook as he tried one last defense. "You'll regret this. You need me. Without me, this place will fall apart." Ryan's reply was steady, final. "No, Dennis, Without people like Emma, this place falls apart. Without cooks, servers, dishwashers, without the people you've treated like machines, there is no restaurant. You were never the backbone. You were the parasite. And tonight, you're finished. The weight of those words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. The reveal was complete. The mask had fallen. And for the first time, Emma allowed herself to look at Ryan not as a fellow dishwasher, but as someone who might finally have the power to change everything. Justice and change. The silence after Ryan's declaration lingered like smoke in the room. For the first time, Dennis had nothing to say. His mouth opened, then closed again, his confidence shattered under the weight of the truth. The staff in the doorway didn't move. They stood frozen, eyes wide, as though they had stumbled into a scene from a play they never thought they would see. Emma sat at the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face pale, caught between disbelief and a fragile spark of hope that she barely dared to let grow. Ryan let the silence hang. He had learned long ago that silence could be as powerful as words. He let Dennis feel the collapse of his kingdom, let the staff absorb the truth that the man they thought was powerless had carried the authority to change their lives all along. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, and filled with the weight of certainty. "Dennis," he said, "you're done here, effective immediately. Your actions, your wage theft, your intimidation, your harassment are not only violations of company policy, they're illegal. Security will be here within the hour to escort you out. And tomorrow, our lawyers will be reviewing every single payroll record you've touched." Dennis's face flushed a deep crimson. He sputtered, trying to summon his old authority, but the words rang hollow. "You can't just waltz in here and take over. I've been running this place for years. These people need me." Ryan turned his gaze deliberately to the staff gathered outside the office, then back to Dennis. "Look at them. Do they look like they need you? They fear you. They despise you. You've built your power on silence and fear, but that ends tonight. You are not this restaurant's strength. You are its weakness, and it's time that weakness is cut out." The cooks and servers exchanged glances. Some nodded subtly, others just stood stunned, but no one spoke in Dennis's defense. That silence was louder than any accusation. It was the proof Ryan needed. Emma finally found her voice, though it trembled as it emerged. You mean he's gone? He can't hurt us anymore?" Ryan turned to her, his expression softening instantly. "He's gone. And he won't hurt you, or anyone else, ever again." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. She lowered her face, pressing her hands against her mouth, as though afraid that if she cried too loudly, it might break the fragile moment. For months she had endured in silence, telling herself to survive one more shift, one more insult, one more unpaid hour. Now, in a single night, the walls she thought immovable had cracked open. Ryan wasn't finished. He stepped past Dennis out into the kitchen so every employee could hear him clearly. He raised his voice, not with anger, but with the steady authority of someone who knew exactly what needed to be said. "I went undercover because I wanted to see with my own eyes what happens inside our kitchens. I wanted to know if the promises made in the boardroom reach the people who actually keep this company alive. What I found here was worse than I imagined, but I also found something else. Strength. I found people who showed up day after day, working harder than anyone has a right to ask, even when treated unfairly. You are the reason this place survives, and from tonight forward, that will be recognized." The staff murmured, some exchanging cautious looks. Ryan continued, his voice firm. "Effective immediately, all unpaid hours will be investigated and restored. Every single employee here will be reimbursed for stolen wages. We will implement an anonymous reporting system so that no manager can ever silence you again. And I will personally oversee reforms to guarantee fair schedules, overtime pay, and safe working conditions across every location in this company." The kitchen erupted, not with cheers, but with something quieter, something deeper. A release of breath, a ripple of relief, the kind of sound people make when they realize they've been carrying a burden so long they forgot what freedom felt like. Dennis, desperate to salvage something, sneered. You think they'll believe you? You think one speech makes you their savior? They'll turn on you the moment you cut their hours, the moment profits dip. Ryan looked at him without flinching. Profits built on suffering aren't profits. They're theft. And if it costs this company money to treat people with dignity, then that's money well spent. Because people are not disposable, Dennis. Emma is not disposable. None of them are. You forgot that. I never will. Security arrived minutes later, two uniformed men who had been called from another location. They entered the office quietly, and their presence more than enough to end Dennis's bluster. He shouted threats, swore that the store would collapse without him, but no one listened. No one even looked at him. For the first time in years, Dennis was powerless. They let him out the back door, his voice fading into the night, and when the door shut behind him, the kitchen seemed to exhale. Ryan turned back to the staff. His shoulders felt heavier now, not lighter because he knew this was only the beginning. Firing Dennis was easy. Fixing the damage he had done, repairing the trust, restoring dignity, building a culture that valued people as much as profit, that would take time. But Ryan was ready. He had waited years for this moment, and he would not waste it. After the staff dispersed, Ryan approached Emma, who still stood near the sink, her hands trembling. She looked up at him, her voice a whisper. I don't understand why you care. People like him never get punished. People like me, we don't get seen. Ryan shook his head gently. You've been seen all along, Emma. You just didn't know it. I grew up watching my own mother break her back in kitchens like this. She complained once about unsafe conditions and lost her job. She never recovered. I swore I'd change things when I had the chance. And tonight, you reminded me why that promise matters. Her eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. She searched his face as though looking for the truth beneath the words. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. Then maybe it really can change. Ryan placed a reassuring hand on the counter between them. It will. Because of people like you who keep going, even when the world feels impossible. You showed me the reality I needed to see, and I won't forget it. For the first time since Ryan had stepped into that kitchen as Kyle, Emma smiled. It was small, fragile, but it carried the warmth of hope long denied. The breaking point had come, and with it the first cracks of light. Dennis was gone, but the fight for justice had only begun. Tomorrow would bring new battles, in BOA, bedrooms, in policies, in shifting the culture of an empire. But tonight, Ryan allowed himself one moment of quiet victory. Because tonight, a dishwasher who had been invisible for too long finally had a voice. And tonight, change was no longer a dream. It was real. A new dawn. 6 months had passed since that night in the Riverbend Grill, when Ryan Carter shed his disguise and revealed himself as the CEO. The world within those kitchen walls had transformed in ways the staff never believed possible. For years they had worked in silence, trapped by fear, enduring long hours, stolen pay, and humiliation at the hands of a manager who thrived on intimidation. Now the air inside the restaurant carried a different weight. It was lighter, brighter, filled not with dread, but with something almost forgotten, pride. Emma Lopez stood at the prep table, her apron clean and crisp, her hair neatly tied back. But she wasn't scrubbing dishes anymore. She wore a new badge pinned carefully to her shirt. Kitchen supervisor. The role had been offered to her by Ryan himself, not out of pity, but because she had proven herself the backbone of the restaurant long before anyone had acknowledged it. She had worked double shifts, carried the burdens of others, endured cruelty without breaking, and still shown up the next day. She had demonstrated leadership not with loud words, but with relentless perseverance. And now, at last, that strength had been recognized. Her schedule was different now. She worked normal shifts with proper breaks. She had weekends off to spend with her son Gabriel, who had just started kindergarten. For the first time since her husband's death, Emma could attend his school plays, read him bedtime stories without falling asleep mid-sentence, and sit at the dinner table with him instead of rushing out the door. The small things, the laughter of her boy, the chance to breathe without fear of losing everything, were the reward she had once believed would never come. Ryan visited the restaurant regularly, but not as a hidden observer anymore. He arrived openly, speaking with staff, listening to their concerns, making sure the reforms he had promised were not just words but lived realities. His presence was not one of distant authority, but of genuine accountability. The staff no longer lowered their eyes when he entered. They looked at him directly, some with cautious gratitude, others with newfound confidence. Trust, once shattered, was slowly being rebuilt. The changes spread far beyond Riverbend Grill. Word traveled quickly through the company's network of restaurants. Employees at other locations began speaking up, filing reports through the new anonymous system Ryan had created. Investigations revealed patterns similar to Dennis's in other stores, and one by one, the managers who had exploited workers were removed. Policies were rewritten, training programs introduced, and for the first time, the people who scrubbed pans, served tables, and cooked meals felt as though their voices mattered. The ripple effect reached the boardroom, where skeptical executives questioned the financial impact. Ryan silenced them with data and conviction. Profit means nothing if it is built on stolen hours and broken people, he told them firmly. We succeed when they succeed. One evening, Ryan organized a company-wide gathering at a downtown convention hall. Hundreds of employees from across the state attended, many arriving still in their uniforms after finishing shifts. The stage was simple, the lights bright, and the atmosphere charged with anticipation. For most, it was the first time they had ever been invited to such an event, not as background workers, but as honored guests. When Ryan stepped onto the stage, the room erupted in applause. He waited for it to quiet before speaking, his voice carrying steady across the hall. 6 months ago, I walked into one of our restaurants not as a CEO, but as a dishwasher. I wanted to understand the lives of the people who make this company run. What I found broke my heart, but it also opened my eyes. I saw exploitation, fear, and exhaustion, but I also saw strength. I saw resilience. I saw people who kept going even when the system failed them. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd, before letting it settle on Emma in the front row. She sat with her son Gabriel on her lap, his small hands clapping along with the others. Ryan continued, his voice growing stronger. Emma Lopez reminded me of a promise I made years ago, a promise born from my mother's struggle. She showed me what real courage looks like. The courage to endure when the world tries to silence you, the courage to keep going for the sake of those you love. Tonight, I want to honor her and every worker like her, because you are not invisible, you are not replaceable, you are the heart of this company. He motioned for Emma to join him on stage. She hesitated, overwhelmed by the applause that surged as she rose. Gabriel tugged her hand, beaming with pride, and together they walked forward. Emma's cheeks burned with emotion as she stood beside Ryan, the spotlight illuminating the journey she had once thought no one would ever notice. Ryan placed a plaque in her hands, engraved with her name and the title Employee of the Year. His words rang clear. This is not just recognition. This is a promise that from this day forward, every Emma in every kitchen will be seen, heard, and valued. The room erupted in a standing ovation. Emma clutched the plaque to her chest, tears streaming down her face while Gabriel hugged her leg tightly. For the first time in years, she felt not like a worker surviving at the margins, but like a human being celebrated for her worth. After the event, as employees mingled and shared their stories, Emma approached Ryan privately. Her voice was quiet, but steady. You changed everything. Not just for me, but for all of us. I don't know how to thank you. Ryan shook his head, his expression warm. Don't thank me. You were the one who gave me the courage to act. Change doesn't come from titles or boardrooms. It comes from people like you who keep standing when the world tries to push you down. All I did was finally listen. That night, Emma walked out of the hall with her son's small hand in hers, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She had a future again. She had dignity, security, and hope, and for the first time she believed her husband's old words, that hard work someday truly could pay off. Ryan watched her go, the applause still echoing in his ears, and felt the weight of his promise settle deeper into his soul. This was only the beginning. The fight to build a just and humane company would continue, but tonight had proven that change was possible. And as the lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, one truth burned brighter than any other. Real leadership was not measured by profits or prestige, but by the courage to stand with those who had been forgotten and to lift them until the world could see them shine. For Emma, for Gabriel, for every dishwasher and server and cook who had ever felt invisible, a new dawn had finally arrived.